was 9 years old when it happened. It's a memory I've tried to bury, but no matter how much I shove it into the darkest corners of my mind, it always finds a way back. It was spring, 1976, and my parents decided we'd spend the day at the spring fair in Central Park. Back then, I thought nothing bad could ever happen there. It was Central Park after all. People everywhere, music, laughter, the smell of funnel cakes and popcorn hanging in the air. But that day, something felt off. I didn't notice it right away. I was too busy bouncing from one booth to the next, my parents trailing behind, trying to keep up. There were games, rides, and a carousel that spun so fast it made my head dizzy just watching it. I begged for cotton candy, and my dad handed me a pink swirl so big it nearly blocked my view of the fair. I felt like the happiest kid in the world, but then I saw him. He wasn't like the other clowns at the fair, with their big shoes and obnoxious honking noses. This one was different. He didn't talk, didn't make balloon animals, didn't even try to get anyone's attention. He just stood there, by the edge of a mirrored funhouse, smiling at me. Not the kind of smile that makes you feel good. It was too wide, too frozen, like it wasn't meant for me or anyone. "Chloe, stay close," Mom said, tugging on my hand. I nodded, but my eyes kept drifting back to that clown. That's when he moved. No, not moved exactly. It was more like a wave, a small motion of his hand, like he was calling me. I remember feeling this strange pull, like I had to go to him. I don't know why. The fair noises started to fade as I walked closer. My parents' voices, the laughter, the music. It all sounded like it was coming from underwater. I turned to tell them I'd be right back, but they were gone. "Hello?" I called out. The clown didn't answer. He just pointed at the funhouse entrance, where the light bulbs flickered erratically. Inside it was cold, too cold for a spring day. The air smelled damp like wet concrete. The mirrors lining the walls reflected warped versions of me, too tall, too short, faces stretched and twisted. I should have left, but something made me stay. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, and every step I took echoed like I was walking in a cave. The clown was behind me now, but I didn't see him in the mirrors. It was just me. Then a sound. Soft. Faint, but unmistakable. Laughter. Silent laughter. It was as if the sound was there, but my ears couldn't fully catch it. "Is someone here?" My voice trembled. A faint flicker of movement caught my eye in one of the mirrors. It wasn't me, though. It was a girl, younger than me, standing still, her eyes wide with terror. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. I ran, my legs barely holding me up as I stumbled through the maze of mirrors. The laughter grew louder, the reflections shifting with every step. That's when I saw him again. The clown. He wasn't in the hallway, but in every single mirror, staring back at me with that frozen smile. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, everything felt wrong. The cold dampness of the funhouse had been replaced by something even more unsettling. Silence. Not the kind of quiet you get in an empty room, but a suffocating, absolute silence. It was like the whole world had gone on mute. I was lying on a surface that felt hard and uneven, like gravel. My head throbbed, and as I sat up, I realized I wasn't in the funhouse anymore. I was outside, but not at the fair. The bright lights and cheerful booths were gone. Instead, I was surrounded by an empty field. It stretched endlessly, the grass overgrown and dotted with strange, gnarled trees. A thick fog clung to the ground, and in the distance, I could see faint, flickering lights, like fireflies, but colder. "Hello?" My voice came out hoarse, cracking under the weight of my fear. No answer. I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me. My hands were filthy, my palms scraped like I'd fallen. I didn't remember falling. I didn't remember anything after that last moment in the funhouse, the clown staring at me from every mirror. Then I heard it again. The laughter. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere. High-pitched and distorted, like it had been recorded on a broken tape. I spun around, my heart pounding, but I couldn't see anyone. "Stop it," I screamed. "Leave me alone." As if in response, the flickering lights in the distance began moving toward me. They weren't fireflies, they were eyes, glowing, pale eyes floating just above the ground. Panic surged through me and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The fog thickened and the air grew colder with every step. I could feel the eyes watching me, their laughter chasing me through the field. Suddenly I saw it, a doorway standing alone in the middle of the field. It was old and wooden, the paint peeling and faded. It shouldn't have been there. It didn't make sense. But in that moment, it was my only hope. I ran for it, throwing myself through the doorway without thinking twice. I hit the ground hard, my body shaking from the impact. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the fair, or at least I thought I was. The bright colors and bustling crowds were there, but everything felt off. The lights seemed dimmer, the music slower, almost like it was being played backwards. People moved around me, but their faces were blurry, like they weren't fully formed. "Chloe!" I turned toward the voice and saw my parents running toward me. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. "Where were you?" My mom cried, pulling me into a tight hug. I don't know," I stammered. "I got lost and there was a clown and—" "A clown?" My dad interrupted, his face pale. "Chloe, we've been looking for you for hours." Hours? It didn't make sense. To me, it felt like only minutes had passed since I'd followed the clown into the funhouse. They led me to a police officer who asked me a dozen questions. I told him everything about the clown, the mirrors, the field, the glowing eyes. But the more I talked, the more his expression changed. By the time I finished, he was looking at me like I was crazy. "There's no clown like that here," he said, "and no funhouse near the edge of the park." I looked back toward where I'd seen the funhouse, but it was gone. My mom squeezed my hand. "Let's just go home." I nodded, too tired and confused to argue. As we walked away, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of a puddle near the carnival's edge, the clown was standing there watching me, his silent laughter echoing in my head. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on, every single one in my room, but it didn't help. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. That frozen smile, those lifeless eyes. The way he stood there, not moving, like he was waiting for something. I told my parents about the puddle reflection. My mom dismissed it as my imagination. But my dad, he got quiet, his face tight like he didn't want to think about it. The nightmares started a few days later. They weren't like normal dreams, though. They felt real, too real. I'd find myself back in that field, the fog curling around my legs, the laughter echoing in the distance. The clown would always be there, standing far off at first, but he'd get closer every time. And every time, I'd wake up just before he reached me. I stopped going to school. My parents tried everything. Therapy, bedtime stories, even a dream catcher my aunt swore by. Nothing worked. Weeks turned into months, and though the nightmares became less frequent, they never fully went away. I'd hear faint laughter in the middle of the night even when I was awake. I started avoiding mirrors altogether. Something about them made my skin crawl, like if I looked for too long, I'd see him again. And then the news broke. It was a story buried in the middle of the local paper, something most people probably skimmed over. Missing children reports rise in Central Park area. I couldn't breathe as I read it. The article listed names and dates, most of them around the time of the spring fair. I didn't know any of the kids, but something about their stories felt familiar. Too familiar. By the time I was in my 20s, I thought I'd left it all behind. I moved out of New York, got a job, started a new life. But deep down I knew it was never really over. It was late one night scrolling through random articles online when I stumbled on something that made my blood run cold. A black and white photo of a carnival in 1935. It showed clowns, acrobats, and families enjoying the rides. But there, in the corner of the photo, was him. The The same painted smile, the same empty eyes. The article said the carnival had been traveling across the U.S. in the 30s when a string of mysterious disappearances began to follow it. Children would vanish without a trace, and the carnival always packed up and left before anyone could investigate. It didn't make sense. If the photo was from 1935, then how could the same clown have been at the fair in 1976? It wasn't possible. I became obsessed, digging through every piece of information I could find. I found police reports, old newspaper clippings, even stories from people who claimed to have seen the silent clown themselves. Every story was the same. A child would wander off, drawn to a clown that no one else seemed to notice. Sometimes the kids came back like me. Sometimes they didn't. One name kept popping up in my research: the Hollow Man. That's what people started calling him. A figure that wasn't quite real, who could step between worlds and lure children into his grasp. I didn't want to go back to Central Park. Every instinct in my body told me to stay far away, but I couldn't let it go. Not after everything I'd uncovered. The Hollow Man wasn't just some urban legend or trick of my imagination. He was real, and I needed to know why he'd chosen me. So one chilly October evening, I went back. The park was quiet, almost too quiet, with only a few joggers and dog walkers scattered here and there. The fairground was long gone, replaced by overgrown grass and cracked pathways. As I walked toward the spot where the funhouse had been, I felt it again. That pull. The air grew colder, heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on me. The world around me seemed to fade, the city noises replaced by an eerie, unnatural silence. And then I saw it. The doorway. It was just like before. Old, wooden, standing alone in the middle of the field. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. This wasn't possible. I don't know what possessed me to step through it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something stronger, something beyond my control. Either way, the moment I crossed the threshold, I was back in the field. The fog was thicker this time, swirling around me like it was alive. The laughter started immediately, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice trembling. The laughter stopped. From the fog, he emerged. The Hollow Man. His painted smile was the same, but his eyes were darker now, hollow pits that seemed to swallow the light. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. "What do you want from me?" I demanded. He pointed behind me. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. There, in the fog, were the children. Dozens of them, maybe more. Their faces pale and their eyes empty. They stood in silence, staring at me. Their expressions a mix of sadness and longing. And then I saw her, the girl from the mirror. She was there, standing at the front of the group, her hand outstretched like she was reaching for me. I don't remember running, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was back in my apartment. My hands were shaking, my clothes damp with sweat. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a hallucination, but the small red balloon tied to my bedpost told me otherwise. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The days blurred together, each one filled with the same questions. Why me? Why did he let me go when so many others never came back? I don't have answers, not really. But I know one thing for sure. He's still out there. Sometimes late at night I'll catch a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye, in a mirror, a reflection in a window, or a shadow that doesn't belong. I try not to look too long, because I know that if I do, he'll smile, and I'll hear that laughter again. It all started when I was 15. I was a normal kid, into scary movies, urban legends, and just about anything that gave me a thrill. So when my buddy Josh said there was a haunted trail near Mammoth Cave in Kentucky that everyone was talking about, I was all in. He called it the scariest thing in the state. Professional-grade props, actors that'll make you scream, and themes so real you'll think you're in a horror movie, he bragged. The night was cold and crisp. We piled into Josh's mom's minivan. Me, Josh, and two other friends, Sarah and Mike. The drive to Terror Trails was full of nervous excitement. We'd heard stories about this place, people running out screaming, grown adults too scared to finish. We laughed, joking about who would chicken out first. When we arrived, the atmosphere hit me like a brick. Strings of red and orange lights were draped over the entrance, and fake fog rolled out from hidden machines. A wooden sign carved with jagged letters read, "Enter if you dare." Around a roaring bonfire, visitors huddled, swapping ghost stories while waiting in line. It was like stepping into a living nightmare. A staff member in a dark hoodie and headset approached us near the ticket booth. "Listen up," he said, his tone serious. "Our actors won't touch you, and you don't touch them. If anyone breaks the rules, they're out. Got it?" He didn't wait for us to respond before waving us in. The first section of the trail was everything I hoped for. It was themed like a rundown carnival, with torn circus tents and eerie calliope music playing on a loop. Clowns with grotesque makeup and unsettling smiles emerged from the shadows, getting close enough to make you flinch but never crossing the line. It was scary, sure, but in a fun way. That was until I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was just another clown, standing at the edge of the trail near the trees, but something about him felt off. His costume was cheap, one of those polyester suits you'd find at a dollar store, with fake bloodstains that looked more like ketchup. His mask wasn't much better, a flimsy rubber thing that barely fit his face. While the other actors moved with precision and purpose, this guy just stood there watching us. He didn't laugh or jump out. He didn't even move. It was like he didn't belong. As we continued down the trail, I glanced back. He was gone. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, focusing on the rest of the carnival zone. We screamed and laughed as clowns lunged at us, wielding fake weapons and making grotesque noises. But every now and then I felt like I was being watched. When we left the carnival section and entered the forest trail, that's when things started to feel wrong. The path was dimly lit with red Christmas lights, casting eerie shadows on the trees. The air felt colder here, heavier. That's when he appeared again, stepping onto the trail just a few feet in front of me. "Nice night for a walk," he said, his voice thick with a southern drawl. His eyes, barely visible through the mask, were bloodshot and wild. "That's some pretty hair you've got there, kid. Real nice. I think I'll take me a piece." Before I could react, he reached out and grabbed a handful of my hair. His grip was strong, rough, and nothing like the playful theatrics of the other actors. My friends, still walking a few steps ahead, hadn't noticed. I froze as he pulled me closer, the smell of whiskey and cigarettes hitting me like a wall. Then I saw it. A knife. Not one of the prop weapons the other actors were using, but a real shiny kitchen knife. The blade caught the dim red light, glinting as he held it just inches from my face. "You've got a lot of fight in you," he muttered, his grip tightening. "Let's see how much you got left." Panic surged through me. My friends turned around, their laughter dying as they saw the knife. "Hey man, what the hell?" Josh shouted, stepping forward. The clown tilted his head like he was amused. "What's wrong? You kids don't like a little fun?" That's when instinct kicked in. I stomped on his foot as hard as I could. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for me to break free. I stumbled back, nearly falling, and bolted down the trail. My friends followed, screaming for help. Behind us, I heard him laugh, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. "Run, little rabbits," he called out. "Run while you can." The forest trail felt endless. My legs burned and my chest ached, but I didn't dare slow down. The red lights flickered overhead, casting moving shadows that made it impossible to tell if he was still behind us. When we burst into the next section, a clearing filled with chainsaw-wielding actors, I thought we were safe. "Help!" I screamed, waving my arms. "There's a guy with a real knife!" At first, they didn't react, assuming we were just playing along. But when Josh pointed back at the trail, their expressions changed. One of the actors, a burly guy in a leather apron, stepped forward, holding his prop chainsaw like a weapon. "That guy's not one of ours. he muttered. The clown emerged from the shadows, his knife still in hand. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, tilting his head as if deciding whether to come closer. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the trees. The staff immediately shut down the trail, escorting us back to the entrance while security searched the area. My friends and I huddled near the bonfire, too shaken to speak. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to appear again. When the staff returned, they told us they hadn't found anyone matching our description. "We'll keep looking," one of them said, but I could tell they didn't believe us. As we waited for our parents to pick us up, I noticed a man lingering near the parking lot. He was leaning against a beat-up truck, smoking a cigarette. He wasn't wearing the clown costume, but I knew it was him. "Guys," I whispered, "that's him." Before anyone could react, he climbed into his truck and drove off, his tires screeching as he sped away. I couldn't let it go. For weeks, I obsessed over that night. I searched online for anything about the trail, the man, or the truck, but found nothing. Then I overheard my mom talking to a neighbor about a nearby trailer park notorious for drugs and crime. She mentioned rumors of a man who dressed as a clown to scare kids. It all clicked. He wasn't part of the haunted trail. He was just some deranged man who had slipped in unnoticed, blending in with the chaos. Years later, I still think about that night. I don't go to haunted attractions anymore. I can't. Every October when I see clowns or hear about haunted trails, I remember his eyes, his voice, and the knife glinting in the dark. And sometimes when I'm out late, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him again. I've always loved a good scare. You know, those urban legends that send shivers down your spine but feel distant enough to laugh off later. At least, that's how I felt until the summer of 1988, when I learned the hard way that some stories are better left untold. It all started on a scorching July afternoon in Shasta. Jake, my best friend, had this wild idea. Spend a night at Pinewood Camp, an abandoned summer camp deep in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. Rachel, the new girl who'd just moved to town, overheard us talking about it in the diner and wanted in. I think Jake invited her partly because he liked her, but mostly because having her around made us seem braver. Pinewood Camp wasn't just abandoned, it was infamous. People talked about kids disappearing back in the 60s, strange noises in the woods, and sightings of a clown that didn't belong in any normal summer camp story. There was even this old article Jake dug up from the library archives. The headline read, "The Laughing Shadow, Unsolved Mysteries of Pinewood Camp." I wasn't totally sold on the idea, but Jake? He was all in. "Come on, man," he said, slapping me on the shoulder. "It's just a bunch of old cabins. What's the worst that could happen?" Turns out a lot. We got to Pinewood just before sunset. The place was like something out of a nightmare. Trees towered over us, their branches casting long shadows across the dirt path. The cabins were decaying skeletons of what they once were. Broken windows, moss-covered roofs, and doors barely hanging on their hinges. Jake led the way, flashlight in hand, acting like he wasn't fazed. Rachel walked close behind him, nervously twisting her hair. I brought up the rear, every crunch of a twig underfoot making me jump. We picked one of the bigger cabins to set up for the night. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and something else I couldn't quite place. On one of the bunks, there was an old, faded costume, a clown suit. "Guess someone had a weird sense of humor," Jake joked, picking it up and holding it against his chest. Rachel frowned. "Put it back. That thing gives me the creeps." Jake rolled his eyes but tossed it onto the bed. "Relax, it's just fabric." That's when we heard it, the faintest echo of laughter. Not loud or close, but distant, like the forest itself was chuckling at us. "Did you hear that?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, though he didn't sound so sure. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the forest. We tried to shake it off. The laughter, the feeling of being watched. Jake kept making stupid jokes trying to lighten the mood, but even he couldn't hide how his hands were trembling when he set up his sleeping bag. Rachel sat near the door, her eyes darting around like she expected something to burst in at any moment. I kept looking at the clown suit. It was just sitting there, draped over the bunk, but it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. The red and yellow fabric was faded, but the way it hung there, it almost looked alive. I couldn't stop staring. "Dude, seriously, stop looking at it," Jake said, nudging me. "It's just a stupid costume." "Yeah," I mumbled, but I wasn't convinced. The sun dipped below the horizon and the forest outside turned pitch black. The only light came from Jake's flashlight and a lantern we brought. The shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, making everything feel smaller, tighter. That's when Rachel found the journal. It was tucked under a pile of rotting blankets in the corner. The cover was cracked leather, and the pages smelled of mildew, but the handwriting was surprisingly clear. It belonged to someone named Charlie K., one of the counselors from decades ago. We flipped through it, reading snippets out loud. At first, it was just boring camp stuff, what kids did during the day, which cabin needed repairs. But then the entries got darker. The kids say they've seen him again, the clown, but there's no one here like that. I've checked the roster, talked to the staff, they're scared to sleep, I don't blame them. Jake laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, this is classic campfire ghost story material." Rachel shook her head. "This isn't funny, this feels real." We kept reading. Charlie talked about hearing laughter at night, finding balloons tied to trees in the middle of the woods. He started losing sleep, swearing he could see a shadow moving outside his cabin every night. The last entry made my blood run cold. He's inside now, laughing, always laughing. I can't make him stop. If anyone finds this, don't stay, don't listen to him. Run. As if on cue, the sound came again. Laughter, closer this time. It wasn't the kind of laugh you'd hear at a party or a comedy show. It was high-pitched, shrill, and somehow wrong. It echoed, bouncing around the cabin walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Rachel stood up, her face pale. "We need to leave now." Jake hesitated, his bravado cracking. "Maybe it's just an animal, like..." But then the clown suit moved. I swear to God, it moved. It was subtle, like the arm shifted just an inch, but it was enough. Jake dropped the flashlight and the beam swung wildly across the room, landing on a single red balloon floating in the doorway. None of us had seen it there before. We bolted out of the cabin, leaving our stuff behind. The forest was even darker than before, the trees pressing in on us from all sides. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the snap of branches, felt amplified, like the entire forest was alive and angry. Rachel led the way, her breathing ragged. Jake and I struggled to keep up. The laughter followed us, sometimes close, sometimes far, but always there. It wasn't just one laugh anymore. It was a chorus, overlapping and chaotic, like dozens of voices were mocking us. "We need to find the road," Rachel shouted, but there was no road, no trail. It was like the forest had swallowed it whole. Jake tripped over a root and hit the ground hard. I stopped to help him up, but he froze, staring into the darkness. "Do you see that?" he whispered. At first, I didn't. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into view. The clown. It stood about 20 feet away, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, teeth gleaming even in the darkness. Its eyes, God, those eyes, were hollow and glowing faintly red. Jake scrambled to his feet, and we ran like hell. We burst into a clearing, panting and terrified. In the middle of the clearing was a circle of balloons, each one tied to a stick driven into the ground. The sticks formed a perfect ring, and in the center was another balloon, bigger than the rest. Written on it, in jagged black letters, was my name. Nick. We stared at the circle of balloons in silence, our breathing ragged and the cold night air burning our lungs. My name floated in the center of that ominous clearing, written in jagged, childlike scrawls. Rachel grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "This can't be real," she whispered. "How does it know your name?" Jake took a shaky step back. "We need to go now." But before we could move, the laughter returned, louder this time and all around us. It came from everywhere, echoing through the trees like a sick symphony. The balloons began to pop, one by one. Each burst louder than the last. The sound rattled in my chest, and with every pop, the laughter grew sharper, more guttural. Then the clown stepped into the clearing. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. That grin, it stretched so wide I thought its face might split in two. It tilted its head, eyes locked on me. "Nick," it said, its voice a distorted whisper, but somehow clear as day. "Why are you running?" My legs wouldn't move. Rachel screamed and grabbed my hand, yanking me away as Jake charged forward with nothing but adrenaline and blind courage. He swung the flashlight at the clown, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it raised a hand, long fingers curling like hooks, and swatted him aside like he was nothing. Jake hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. The clown didn't even glance at him. Its hollow eyes were locked on me. We ran. Rachel and I tore through the woods, branches slashing at our faces, the laughter chasing us like a predator playing with its prey. I looked back once and saw the clown loping after us, its movements erratic but horrifyingly fast. By the time the first rays of sunlight peeked through the trees, we stumbled into the main road. A car screeched to a halt, the driver jumping out and yelling something, but I couldn't hear him. My ears were ringing, my legs barely holding me up. Rachel collapsed beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. "Jake," she croaked. "We left him." The driver helped us into his car, asking questions we couldn't answer. All I could think about was that circle of balloons, Jake's scream, and the way the clown's hollow eyes seemed to pierce straight through me. The police found Jake's body later that day, or what was left of it. They said it looked like an animal attack, but we knew the truth. They didn't find the clown, or the balloons, or any sign of what really happened that night. Rachel and I never talked about it again. She moved away a few weeks later, and I stayed in Shasta, trying to pretend it was just a bad dream. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that laughter. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A few months ago, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single red balloon and a note that said, "You can't run forever. I think about Jake every day, about how we should have never gone to Pinewood Camp, about how maybe one day I'll have to go back, and this time I don't think I'll make it out." It all started during one of my regular live streams. You know, the usual kind. Me walking through some spooky spot while my followers spammed the chat with, "No way I'd go there," or "You're crazy, Megan." That day, I was in this old library in New Orleans. It's called the Ladder Memorial Library, and it's beautiful but kind of creepy, especially late in the afternoon when the shadows stretch out like they're alive. As I was wandering between the shelves, my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had joined the stream with the username Grinning Jack. Weird name, but I didn't think much of it at first. Then they started sending emojis, just clown faces, one after the other, mixed with this laughing emoji that looked way too sinister. I played it off like it was a joke. "All right, Jack, what's with the clowns? You trying to freak me out?" I joked, laughing nervously. But the messages didn't stop. Then came a message that froze me. "I can see you. You're by the history section, aren't you?" I glanced around, heart pounding, but the library was practically empty. Just me and the old librarian up front. My chat went wild, of course, telling me to leave or that it was a prank. I wanted to believe that too. So I brushed it off and wrapped up the stream early, but something about it stuck with me. A couple of days later, I decided to film at Audubon Park. I needed to shake off the weird vibes from the library, and the park was perfect. Open, sunny, and full of people. I was halfway through recording when I noticed something in the background of my video. At first, it was just a blur, but when I zoomed in on the playback later, my stomach dropped. It was a clown, Bright red hair, a white painted face, and a blue suit. The thing is, they weren't doing anything, just standing there far off, watching. I told myself it was a coincidence, maybe some street performer or someone messing around. But when I filmed at the park again a few days later, the same figure showed up. Only this time, they were closer. I started to feel this creeping paranoia, like I was being followed. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the clown pop out from behind a tree or something. Later that night, when I reviewed the footage, I saw them again, standing near the playground. But here's the kicker. The playground had been completely empty when I was there. I woke up the next morning, still shaken from seeing that clown in my park footage. I tried convincing myself it was just some weirdo who happened to be in the same spot. Coincidences happen, right? But when I stepped out of my apartment to grab coffee, I froze. There it was. A bright red balloon tied to my apartment's railing. It wasn't like one of those cheerful, shiny balloons from a party. No, this thing looked dirty, like it had been dragged through the mud, and written on it in what looked like black marker was one word: smile. I couldn't move. My hands were shaking as I stared at it. Someone had to put it there during the night, right? But how did they get in? My building's locked, and the only way up is the stairs or the fire escape. I took a picture for evidence and tossed the balloon in the trash before heading back inside. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a prank or someone's idea of a joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. That night, I set up a small camera facing my door. I wasn't about to let this go unchecked. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor light in the hallway turned on. I bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, and checked the live feed on my phone. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, the light flickered, and for a split second, there it was. The clown. Standing at the end of the hall, staring directly at my door. I couldn't breathe. When I blinked, they were gone. The next day, I called the police. I mean, what else could I do? I explained everything. The messages, the clown sightings, the balloon. They didn't take me very seriously, of course. One officer even chuckled, asking if I'd been watching too many horror movies. But they agreed to send a patrol car to drive by the building at night. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. That evening, I decided to distract myself by doing a live stream. My followers were my comfort zone, and I needed to feel connected to someone. I didn't mention the clown. It felt too real, too personal. Instead, I kept things light, talking about upcoming projects and answering questions. About 15 minutes in, the chat blew up. "Who's behind you? Is this a joke? Turn around." I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, I turned the camera toward the room behind me. Nothing. Just my living room, dimly lit by a single lamp. "I think you guys are seeing things," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice wavered. I ended the stream early and locked all the doors and windows. Later that night, when I rewatched the live stream, I saw it. Just for a moment, but it was there, peeking around the corner of my hallway. The clown. I couldn't take it anymore. The sightings, the balloons, the feeling of always being watched. It was suffocating. That night, I packed a bag and drove out of the city. I didn't even know where I was going, I just needed to get away. Eventually, I ended up in Metairie Cemetery. I know it sounds insane, but cemeteries have always been my weird safe space. Quiet, empty, and oddly peaceful. I figured I could record some B-roll footage for my channel and clear my head at the same time. The cemetery was pitch black, except for the faint glow of my flashlight. As I walked past the mausoleums, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots was the only sound. But then, I heard something else. Laughter. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then it grew louder. A high-pitched, distorted giggle that echoed through the graves. My heart raced as I swung the flashlight around, scanning the area. Nothing. Just rows of silent, crumbling tombstones. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No answer. Just the sound of laughter, closer now. And then I saw it. Standing by one of the mausoleums, half hidden in the shadows. The clown. It didn't move. Just stood there, staring at me. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The proportions of its body were off. Too long, too thin. Its painted smile seemed to stretch unnaturally across its face. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I don't remember how far I ran or how I made it back to my car. The next thing I knew, I was driving at full speed, barely able to keep my hand steady on the wheel. My camera was still rolling, sitting in the passenger seat. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window and collapsed onto the couch, shaking. The camera's battery had died, but I forced myself to watch the footage from earlier. At first it seemed normal, just me walking through the cemetery. But then the screen flickered. For a split second, the clown's face appeared inches from the camera, staring directly into the lens. I don't know how it got so close without me seeing it. The footage ended with static, followed by a single word whispered in a distorted voice. Smile. The police never found anything. No evidence, no suspects, nothing. My followers noticed I stopped streaming after that. Every now and then, I still get emails or comments from them asking what happened. But I can't bring myself to tell them the truth. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear laughter outside my window. And sometimes, I find red balloons tied to my fire escape. When I was 10, my family decided to take a trip to our hometown in Indiana for the summer. It wasn't a big city or anything, more like one of those small towns where everyone knows each other, and you can't walk down the street without bumping into someone who knows your mom. We were visiting for a wedding and everything was planned out. Family gatherings, church, the works. That particular day, my parents were busy getting ready for the wedding. My older sister had gone to her friend's house and everyone else in the family had already left for the event. That left me at home, alone. Now, I wasn't a fan of being stuck inside on a beautiful day, especially in a town like this. I remembered there was a park just 2 blocks away, Civic Park, a spot where I used to play when I was little. So, I decided to ask my mom if I could go there for a bit. At first, they weren't having it. "You'll be alone," my mom said, "and we won't be around to check on you." "But it's so close, there's no way the park will be empty on a day like this," I argued. I kept pestering them while they got dressed until they finally caved. "Fine," my dad said, pointing a finger at me. "But you come back before it gets dark. Got it?" "Got it," I practically shouted as I grabbed my sneakers and ran out the door. The walk to the park didn't take more than 10 minutes. I was excited to relive those carefree memories of swinging, sliding, and making new friends. But when I got there, something was off. The place was dead. Not a single person in sight. This was the park in town, one of the only 2 parks around, and it was always packed. Yet here I was, standing in the middle of an empty playground. It was weird, sure, but I was a kid. I didn't overthink stuff like that. I spotted the swing set, my old favorite, and headed straight for it. As I kicked my legs back and forth, I let myself get lost in the sound of the creaking chains and the warm summer breeze. That's when I noticed him. On the far side of the park, near a small gate that led to the street, a man dressed as a clown was waving at me. Behind him was a white van parked in the shade of a big oak tree. I stopped swinging. Clowns weren't unusual at parties or events, but seeing one here, in an empty park, didn't sit right with me. "Hey there, kid," he called out, his voice carrying across the playground. He spoke in a friendly tone, but something about it made my stomach twist. I didn't move. "Do you like clowns?" he asked, smiling wide. I shook my head slowly. The clown's smile dropped into a mock pout. "Aw, that's no good. Let me see if I can change that." He reached into the van and pulled out a deflated balloon. Blowing it up, he twisted and turned it until it became a balloon dog. He held it up proudly and gestured for me to come closer. Against my better judgment, I took a few hesitant steps toward him. He handed me the balloon dog, and for a second, I smiled. "See?" he said, his grin widening. "You like clowns now, don't you?" I nodded this time, giving him a small smile back, but the way he smiled at me, it wasn't right. It was too wide, too forced, like he was trying way too hard. It sent a chill down my spine. "If you want to see more tricks," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, almost whispery tone, "you'll have to come closer. I've got plenty more inside my van." My stomach twisted into knots as soon as he said it. Inside the van, even as a 10-year-old, I knew that wasn't right. I hesitated, clutching the balloon dog like it could somehow protect me. I can't," I stammered, taking a step back. "The park exit is on the other side." The clown's face changed. His smile faded, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of annoyance. But then, like flipping a switch, the grin was back, bigger and creepier than ever. "Oh, come on, kid," he said, his voice dripping with fake charm. "I can lift you over the gate, it's no trouble. We'll have so much fun in my truck, just come a little closer." His tone was playful, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, cold, and locked on me like a predator sizing up its prey. I took another step back. "No, I'm fine here," I managed to say, my voice trembling. His grin twisted into something darker. His hands went to his hips, and he leaned forward slightly, like he was about to scold me. "Now, that's not very nice. I made you a balloon dog, didn't I? Don't you want to see what else I can do?" My heart was racing. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Then I heard it. Hey kid, over here!" I whipped my head around and saw a man on the other side of the park. He was waving his arms and jogging toward us. I recognized him immediately. He was our neighbor, Mr. Carter. Relief washed over me like a wave. Without saying a word to the clown, I turned and bolted toward Mr. Carter as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't stop running until I was right next to Mr. Carter. I grabbed his arm, gripping it tightly like it was the only thing keeping me safe. "Hey, it's okay," he said, ruffling my hair. "You all right, buddy?" I nodded, breathless, and glanced back at the clown. He was standing by the gate, watching us with a look that sent shivers down my spine. His creepy smile was gone, replaced by a cold, angry glare. "Thanks for keeping him entertained," Mr. Carter called out, waving to the clown. The clown hesitated, then forced a smile and waved back. "No problem," he said, his voice flat. As we turned to walk away, I heard Mr. Carter mutter under his breath, "Sick bastard." I looked up at him, confused. "What's going on?" I asked. Mr. Carter sighed, glancing around like he was making sure we weren't being followed. "Look, kid, that wasn't a real clown. He's been going around small towns like this trying to lure kids into his van. We've been hearing about him for weeks." My heart sank. What does he do to them?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "You don't need to worry about that. What matters is you're safe now. We're calling the cops as soon as we get home." I didn't say anything. I just clung to his arm as we made our way back toward the neighborhood. When we got to my house, Mr. Carter knelt down and looked me in the eye. "Listen, kid, you gotta be careful. Not everyone is who they seem. If someone ever gives you that weird feeling again, you run. Got it?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. He gave me a small smile and patted my shoulder. "Good. Now go on inside. I've got a call to make." I hugged him tight, whispering, "Thank you." "It's all right, buddy. Just stay safe." As I stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling of the clown's eyes on me. I peered out the window, half expecting to see that van parked across the street. But it was gone. I didn't tell my parents about what happened when they got back. I didn't want to scare them, or get in trouble for going to the park in the first place. But that night, as I lay in bed, I kept hearing his voice in my head. "Just come a little closer." I thought I'd be able to forget about it. That, over time, the memory of the clown and his creepy smile would fade like a bad dream. But even now, years later, I can still see his face clear as day whenever I close my eyes. That night, after everything that had happened, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the encounter in my head, every word he said, every look he gave me. It all felt like it had been burned into my brain. But it wasn't just the memory that kept me awake. It was the thought of what could have happened if Mr. Carter hadn't shown up. What if I had taken one more step toward that van? What if I had climbed inside? I tried to push those thoughts away, but they wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Apparently, the police had been patrolling the area all night looking for a white van matching the description Mr. Carter gave them. They didn't find anything. "It's like he vanished," my dad said. "Whoever it was, they're long gone by now." I wanted to say something, to tell them what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come out. I just sat there eating my cereal, feeling like a ghost in my own house. A few days later, I saw Mr. Carter again. He was outside mowing his lawn, and I walked over to thank him properly. "Hey, kid," he said, turning off the mower. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "Yeah. Thanks for, helping me." He gave me a small smile. "Of course. You did good, running away like that. Some kids might not have." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been eating at me. "Do you think they'll catch him?" Mr. Carter's face darkened. He glanced toward the street, then back at me. "I hope so," he said quietly. "But guys like that, they're slippery. You just have to stay smart, all right? Don't let your guard down." I nodded, but his words didn't exactly make me feel better. About a week later, something strange happened. It was late at night, and I was in my room, trying to fall asleep. The house was quiet, and the only light came from the street lamp outside my window. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping sound, coming from somewhere outside. At first I thought it was the wind, maybe a tree branch brushing against the side of the house, but then it came again, closer this time. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Slowly I got up and walked over to the window. I pulled back the curtain, peering outside. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Just the faint orange glow of the street lamp. But then I saw it. Parked just down the street, half hidden in the shadows, was a white van. I froze. My mouth went dry and my hands started shaking. It couldn't be him. It couldn't. I stared at the van, waiting for something, anything, to happen. For a moment it felt like time had stopped. Then, the driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out, moving slowly, deliberately. Even in the dim light, I recognized him immediately. The clown. He wasn't wearing the full costume this time, just the makeup. His face was painted white with a red nose and a wide, jagged smile that looked like it had been drawn on with a knife. He turned his head, looking straight at my window. I stumbled back, pulling the curtain closed. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. For a few minutes, I just stood there trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I thought I saw, that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then the tapping started again. This time it was coming from the front door. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there listening as the tapping grew louder and more insistent. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I waited, my ears straining for any sound. Minutes passed, but everything was silent. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek out the window again. The van was gone. The next morning, I told my parents everything. About the clown, the van, the tapping. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. They called the police, who came and took my statement. They promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood and told us to call them immediately if we saw anything suspicious. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't come back. He'd already scared me half to death. That was enough for him, for now. Years later, I heard about a man who was arrested in another state. He was caught trying to lure a child into a van while dressed as a clown. When I saw his mugshot on the news, my blood ran cold. It was him. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Even without the makeup, they were the same. Cold, calculating, and full of something that still makes my skin crawl. The reporter said he'd been linked to several kidnappings across the country. Some of the kids were found, others weren't. To this day, I don't know why he let me go. Maybe it was because of Mr. Carter. Maybe it was just dumb luck. But every now and then, I think about what he said to me in the park. Just come a little closer. And I wonder how many other kids heard those same words. Kids who weren't as lucky as me. Growing up in Asheville, North Carolina, my childhood felt like it came straight out of a small-town postcard. Our neighborhood was tiny, with every street funneling into this big semicircular park surrounded by woods and a set of rusty old train tracks. It was the kind of place where kids stayed out until the streetlights flickered on, running wild without a care in the world. It was me, my brother Jack, my best friend Emily, and Jack's best friend Brian. The four of us ruled that park for years. We had a whole setup. Secret forts, bike trails, and even a no-go zone deep in the woods where we dared each other to explore but rarely did. Something about that spot always felt wrong. For the most part, we stuck to the creek that snaked through the edge of the woods. That's where we spent countless afternoons building dams, skipping rocks, and pretending to be explorers. I didn't think much of the woods back then. Sure, they were creepy, but they were also part of the adventure. It wasn't until that one afternoon that I realized how dangerous they could really be. It started out like any other day. Jack and Brian were waist deep in one of their pointless projects, stacking rocks in the creek to create a waterfall or something equally ridiculous. Emily and I were nearby, setting up what we called our camp, just a circle of logs where we could sit and talk. The air was warm, and the sun was beginning to dip below the trees, casting long, flickering shadows. It was peaceful, until I felt it. You know that feeling you get when someone's watching you? It started as a tingle at the back of my neck, then grew into this heavy, suffocating weight. I looked around, but there was nothing there. "Hey, Em," I said, trying to sound casual. "You feel that?" "Feel what?" she asked, brushing dirt off her jeans. "I don't know. Like, we're not alone." She gave me a skeptical look, but I couldn't shake it. My eyes kept darting to the tree line. I didn't see anything, but I swear I felt it. When Jack and Brian decided they were starving and headed back to Brian's house for snacks, I hesitated. A part of me wanted to go with them, but Emily and I stayed behind to finish the camp. We didn't want the boys to come back and claim we'd chickened out. We were stacking some bigger rocks near the creek when that feeling hit me again, stronger this time. "Em," I whispered, freezing in place. "Don't move." "What is it?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper too. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on a bush about 30 feet away. At first, it was just a flash of red and blue, but then I realized it wasn't just colors. It was a person. "Someone's there," I said, my voice shaking. Emily followed my gaze, squinting at the bush. For a moment, it was dead silent. Then he stepped out. It was a clown. Not the happy birthday party kind. No, this one was wearing a dirty red and blue jumpsuit with smudged makeup and a painted-on smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. He was holding a knife, a massive, shiny knife that caught the last rays of sunlight. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "Run," I said, grabbing her arm. We bolted. The clown didn't yell or laugh. He didn't even run at first. He just walked after us, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. But as we hit the edge of the woods, I heard him pick up speed. My lungs burned as we tore through the park, heading straight for the cul-de-sac where Emily lived. Jack and Brian were sitting on the curb, laughing about something, completely unaware of what was behind us. "Run!" I screamed, my voice cracking. They jumped up, startled. "What's going on?" Jack called. "There's a clown," Emily shouted, her voice breaking into sobs. At first they thought we were joking, but then they saw him. The clown burst out of the woods, his painted grin visible even from a distance. Jack's jaw dropped, and Brian actually stumbled backward. "Holy crap," Jack muttered. We didn't stop. We ran past them, heading straight for Emily's house. Her dad, Steve, was standing in the driveway, holding a can of beer and looking confused. "Girls, what's wrong?" he called. "There's a guy!" Emily screamed. "A clown, he has a knife." Steve's face went from annoyed to serious in an instant. He stepped forward, squinting at the tree line. That's when the clown stopped. He was standing at the edge of the park now, completely still, just staring at us. The knife dangled from his hand, catching the last bit of sunlight. "Get inside," Steve said, his voice low and firm. We didn't argue. As we bolted toward the house, I heard the faint sputter of a car engine. A beat-up yellow Pinto rolled into the cul-de-sac, its rusty doors rattling with every bump. The clown didn't even look at us. He just climbed into the passenger seat, like this was all part of some sick routine. The car drove off slowly. The driver, a scruffy-looking man with a cigarette hanging from his mouth, not even glancing our way. Steve called the police, and they showed up within minutes. We told them everything. What he looked like, what he was wearing, the car he got into. They promised to patrol the area, but even as they reassured us, I could see the doubt in their eyes. For weeks, the park was under constant surveillance. Steve didn't let us out of his sight, and Emily and I refused to go near the woods. The city eventually cleared the trees, turning the area into an open walking path. But no one ever caught the clown. Years later, I still think about that day. About his painted smile, the way he followed us without a word, and the way he just disappeared. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget the feeling of his eyes locked on mine. And every time I see a clown, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for his next victim.